Hot Lushootseed. Dus dxʷləšucid Tulalip. Hello, everybody. I am Sarah Miller. I work in the language department as a language teacher, and I also teach some history. And so today we are going to go over the different articles of the treaty. This is not a flattering angle, but it's okay. We'll manage. Okay. So I'm a little nervous, so I might stutter, stammer. I might stop and take large, deep breaths just to kind of calm me down. But I wanted to teach people about the treaty. I mean, I know we all know about the treaty, but I think it's written in a lot of like legalese, so that's it can be kind of confusing. So what I've done is I've kind of gone through each article of the treaty, and there are 15 altogether. And I've kind of taken that legalese and I've simplified it a little bit. Because that's how I learn, and that helps me retain information when I kind of break it apart. So I'm hoping that would be helpful to other people as well. Hold on, let me get my stuff together. So a little history, a little more history about this area. We're going to talk about the Land Donation Claim Act of 1850. Governor Isaac Stevens was the man who brought the treaty before the natives, was eager and determined to get as much land as he could from them. He wanted the indigenous removed from the path of American progress, and it was very important to him, as well as the American government, to settle as much of the land in the West as possible. So let me see, where's my text box? And I don't like that color. So there we go. So the Land Donation Claim Act of 1850. And this was some years before the treaties were signed. So the Claim Act made it possible for the government to get as much of the land as possible, especially in the West. And this was also called like the Oregon Land Law, and that was back when Oregon inhabited some of Washington state. So this act allowed settlers to travel to the Pacific Northwest and claim land. Back then, each settler could claim 320 acres if they were unwed. If they were a married couple, they could claim 640 acres. And it was stated that the settlers shall have resided upon and cultivated the same land for 4 consecutive years before they were able to get the title for the land. So what that means is they basically traveled to the West and, staked their claim for the land, and they had to cultivate it. They had to, farm on it, build a homestead. And then they were, for 4 years, and then they were able to get the title for the land. So the government was, practically giving away the land in an effort to get it all settled. And that was, they were interested in settling the West. Oops. I'm not used to typing on this thingy. So in the 1840s, and this is why they were interested in settling the West, in the 1840s, British and Russian settlements were showing up in Canada and Alaska. The American government wanted to prevent the West from being settled by either of those entities, hence the signing of the Land Donation Claim Act. So the American government didn't want Britain or Russia to settle what is, North America, the bulk of North America, before they'd had a chance to do it. However, none of that land had been secured from the natives who were living on it. And this is where the treaties come in. Settlers had already made their way to the Pacific Northwest and started claiming acres but the natives were still residing on that land. So it was Governor Isaac Stevens' job to get the natives out of the way. The treaties were to buy the land from the natives to accommodate the settlers. The government cared a lot more about settling the West than the rights of the people who had inhabited this land for many generations. Governor Stevens thought he knew what was best for the many native people. In addition to securing the land from them, he told them that they would be relocated to reservations and that they would be expected to abandon their way of life to learn how to farm and to keep a more traditional homestead. Traditional, if you're one of the settlers. Stevens thought that farming was a lot more civilized than hunting or fishing. He also promised to provide education to help them learn how to farm. Stevens wasn't aware that a lot of this land wasn't very farmable at the time. I mean, depending on where the land was, there were a lot of wetlands and marshes, or it was very, very rocky. So it was kind of hard to cultivate the land so that it could grow food. But this didn't deter Stevens, as he wanted the natives to integrate into white culture. So Stevens considered himself like something of a father to the natives and said that he and the American government knew what was best for them. So that's how we got to where we are with the treaties. How we got to where we had to sign it. So after having signed the treaty, the natives ceded their lands to the U.S. government. There were, fishing rights that they maintained at their usual and accustomed fishing areas. But in 1 year, the natives had to relocate to the reservations following the ratification of the treaty. The government would compensate the natives for their land for $150,000. This was supposed to be paid over the next 20 years. The heads of families received divided land lots, and the government and treaty promised agricultural and industrial schools on reservation lands. So that's it's a lot of stuff, right? So let's see. The treaty starts out, listing all the tribes that were a part of the Treaty of 1855. And some of those were Duwamish, Suquamish, Skokomish, Sammamish, Smokamish, Skopomish, Mish, Snoqualmie, Skycomish, Stillaguamish, Snohomish, Lummi, Skagit, Ealis, Swinomish, Sock, Suaddle, I'm pronouncing that, Nowaha. Pronouncing it right. Did I spell that right? Mish. Do you think that was Nookachomps? EC. Not misspell any of these. And So these were all listed under the Treaty of 1855 for Point Elliot. I should know what I do. There we go. So yeah, they had the big meeting. There were different people from these tribes in attendance. pretty big meeting. Let me see. Can I move this without like messing everything up? Yes. So Article 1, and I'm going to read the article and then simplify it. And the first one, it's a long one. The said tribes and bands of Indians hereby cede, relinquish, and convey to the United States all their right, title, and interest in and to the lands and country occupied by them, bounded and described as follows. Commencing at a point on the eastern side of Admiralty Inlet, known as Point Pulley, about midway between Commencement and Elliot Bays, thence eastwardly, running along the north line of lands heretofore ceded to the United States by the Nisqually, Puyallup, and other Indians, to the summit of the Cascade Range of mountains. Thence northwardly, following the summit of said range to the 49th parallel of the north latitude, thence west along said parallel to the middle of the Gulf of Georgia, thence through the middle of said Gulf and the main channel through Canal de Oro to the Straits of Fuca, and crossing the same through the middle of Admiralty Inlet to Suquamish Head, thence southwesterly through the peninsula and following the divide between Hood's Canal and Admiralty Inlet to the portage known as Wilkes Portage, thence northeastwardly and following the line of lands heretofore ceded as aforesaid to the point southward on the western side of Admiralty Inlet, and thence around the foot of Vashon's Island, eastwardly and southeastwardly to the place of beginning, including all the islands comprised within said boundaries, and all the right, title, and interest of the said tribes and bands to any lands within the territory of the United States. What? That's a lot. That's a lot to read. And if you're not used to that kind of legalese, which I wasn't, it can kind of get confusing. So Article 1, basically, let me move this over here, is ceding of the land of indigenous in that area. But wait, there's more. To put it in more modern days terms, this means that the natives give up their land to the United States, and these were the counties. King, part of Kitsap, Snohomish, Whatcom Island, and San Juan. You spell Juan. Article 1 is basically the ceding of the land. So that's that. That's the first one. Second, Article 2. There is, however, reserved for the present use and occupation of the said tribes and bands the following tracts of land, viz., the amount of 2 sections or 1,280 acres surrounding the small bight at the head of Port Madison, called by the Indians Nusocum. I might be mispronouncing that. The amount of 2 sections or 1,280 acres on the north side of Snohomish Bay, and the creek emptying into the same, called Quilceda. The peninsula at the southeastern end of Perry's Island, called Scheisquolt, and the island called Cha-Chosin, situated in the Lummi River at the point of separation of the mouths emptying respectively into Bellingham Bay and the Gulf of Georgia. All which tracts shall be set apart, and so far as necessary, surveyed and marked out for their exclusive use, nor shall any white man be permitted to reside upon the same without permission of the said tribes or bands, and of the superintendent or agent. But if necessary for the public convenience, roads may be run through the said reserves. the Indians being compensated for any damage thereby done them. Excuse me. So what is Article 2? It's the assignment of reservation lands. Oops. Basically, this reserves the amount of 2 sections or 1,280 acres surrounding the bay at the head of Port Madison and 2 sections on the east side near Fidalgo Island. So this is where the government was going to put us. Article 3. Did it all there. Article 3. There is also reserved from out the lands hereby ceded the amount of 36 sections or 1 township of land on the northeastern shore of Port Gardner and north of the mouth of Snohomish River, including Tulalip Bay and the before-mentioned Coolseta Creek, for the purpose of establishing thereon an agricultural and industrial school, as hereinafter mentioned and agreed, and with a view of ultimately drawing thereto and settling thereon all the Indians living west of the Cascade Mountains in said territory. Provided, however, that the President may establish the central agency and general reservation at such other point as he may deem for the benefit of the Indians. So what does this one mean? We have 3. This part of the treaty sets aside the reservation lands where an agricultural school and an industrial school on the northeastern shore of Port Gardner. So industrial and agricultural schools. Gardner. Another text box. We didn't exactly get those schools. We got other schools. We know that. With the industrial and agricultural schools, that was how we were going to learn how to farm the land and, you know, become familiar with whatever tools were needed for that kind of agricultural work. Article 4. The said tribes and bands agree to remove to and settle upon the said first above mentioned reservations within 1 year after the ratification of this treaty, or sooner, if the means are furnished them. In the meantime, it shall be lawful for them to reside upon any land not in actual claim and occupation of citizens of the United States, and upon any land claimed or occupied, if with the permission of the owner. So basically, 1 year after ratification, the natives have to move. So after the different tribes, different people from different tribes signed the treaty, they thought that right then and there they had 1 year to move their reservation land. So they pretty much started heading for them. But Congress did not ratify the treaty until April 11th of 1859. So they didn't understand that they could have stayed there. I mean, but how do you explain ratification to people who don't, you know, they don't have that kind of legalese in their language? I feel like government back then might have been kind of confusing for some of the natives, and considering that all this was being said in English, translated to the Chinook jargon, and then from Chinook jargon translated into Lushootseed. So you can imagine things getting lost in translation there. So they thought that they had to move right after they signed. But in actuality, it wasn't until Congress ratified the treaty that they actually had to move, and that didn't happen until 1859. According to Harriet Shelton Dover, many of the people were moving away from freshwater streams, and the nearest stream was half a mile or 1 full mile away. She laments that women with babies would pack them up along with 2 buckets to get water from the stream. Aside from that, when they moved, they had no housing for the people. They were used to living in the communal longhouses, but once they were on the reservation, they had no housing. So they'd abandoned their old villages for this reservation that had no houses, that was far away from their freshwater streams, from their hunting and fishing and gathering grounds. And people were dying of starvation. Once they were there, on their reservations, they were ordered not to leave. So they couldn't even go out and hunt and gather, as they were accustomed to doing. And, in some instances, they would get in their canoes to go fish, but they might encounter a white settler who would tell them, you have to go back to your land. So kind of a raw deal right there. Moving on, Article 5. The right of taking fish at usual and accustomed grounds and stations is further secured to said Indians in common with all citizens of the territory, and of erecting temporary houses for the purpose of curing, together with the privileges of hunting and gathering roots and berries on open and unclaimed lands, provided, however, that they shall not take shellfish from any beds staked or cultivated by citizens. So when the treaty talks about citizens, they're talking about like the white settlers who came onto the land and staked their claim. So what this article means, what Article 5 means, is that the natives have the right to continue fishing, gathering, hunting in usual and accustomed areas. Provided that, that land wasn't owned by somebody, some civilian. Now we are on to Article 6. Sorry, I'm reading through my notes. More on Article 5 before we move on to Article 6. I mean, that was article was really, really important to the indigenous people, our ancestors. I mean, that's, their livelihood was the sea, was the salmon. It was, clams and crabs and all that stuff. I mean, at the time, white people didn't have much of an interest in fish. So, I mean, and it wasn't until the turn of the century that white people would take up like sport fishing, and then commercialized fishing came in. And that's when the natives started being concerned about, when and where they could fish. So, but like, considering they were not allowed to leave their reservations once they were on there, and some people didn't, they didn't have easy access to the fishing grounds. So they could try to gather, from what they could from this new land that they were put on. But that's why a lot of people were starving, because they couldn't go get their shellfish. They couldn't go get their, their salmon. Excuse me, allergies. And everybody was in like one central location, right? So, I mean, you get that many people in just one area, and you're going to like go through whatever resources are there. If there's like roots or berries, or if you're hunting in the woods, or whatever fish might be close to the, the bay, whatever you can get is going to go fast when you have that many people in a central location. So food was running scarce, and that's why a lot of people were starving. Okay. Now, Article 6. In consideration of the above session, the United States agreed to pay to the said tribes and bands the sum of $150,000 in the following manner. That is to say, for the first year after the ratification hereof, $15,000. For the next 2 years, $12,000 each. For the next 3 years, $10,000 each year. For the next 4 years, $7,500 each year. For the next 5 years, $6,000 each year. And for the last 5 years, $4,250 each year. All which said sums of money shall be applied to the use and benefit of the said Indians under the direction of the President of the United States, who may, from time to time, determine at his discretion upon what beneficial objects to expend the same. The Superintendent of Indian Affairs or other proper officer shall each year inform the President of the wishes of said Indians in respect thereto. So this is basically the United States agreed to pay tribes and natives, or tribes and bands, my bad, $150,000. So a year after the ratification, they get like $15,000. Then in 2 years, $12,000. For the next 2 years, $12,000. The next 4 years, $7,500. And the next 5 years, $6,000. And that's like for each year. In the last 5 years, $4,250. The president has authority to decide how to utilize this money for the tribes. Fun, right? The money that the natives were supposed to get was supposed to be handed over to like trust funds, as it was considered that the natives were unable to manage their own money. And not that it's the nicest terms to say that, but we hadn't had the concept of white money until the settlers came. So like we had an idea, like it was, but we, they didn't try, I guess the government didn't trust us to kind of hold on to our own money. So it was put into trust funds for them. And that's what the Bureau of Indian Affairs handled. But in lieu of money, agents would often hand out goods that were worth less than the debt owed. So that's how well that worked. There were court filings that had to do with the lack of payment for not only the lands, but the tribal people, or not only the lands that the tribal people ceded, but the houses that they had to abandon as well, meaning their longhouses, which I read somewhere, and I wish I could remember where. Like a lot of white people ended up burning the longhouses to get them off that land so that they could build their homes there, which is just ugly and tragic. Moving on, Article 7. The president may hereafter, when in his opinion the interest of the territory shall require and the welfare of the said Indians be promoted, remove them from either or all of the special reservations hereinbefore made to the said general reservation, or such other suitable place within said territory as he may deem fit, on remunerating for their improvements and expenses of such removal, or may consolidate them with other friendly tribes or bands, and he may further at his discretion cause the whole or any portion of the lands hereby reserved, or of such other land as may be selected in lieu thereof, to be surveyed into lots, and assign the same to such individuals or families as are willing to avail themselves of the privilege, and will locate on the same as a permanent home on the same terms and subject to the same regulations as are provided in the 6th article of the treaty with the Omahas, so far as the same may be applicable. Any substantial improvements heretofore made by any Indian, and which he shall be compelled to abandon in consequence of this treaty, shall be valued under the direction of the president, and payment made accordingly therefore. I get tongue-tied reading that. So imagine having to translate that into Chinook jargon and then translate that into like Lushootseed. It took like 3 or 4 people to translate everything back and forth. This means that the reservation can be divided and given to individuals. Oftentimes, these allotments of land were sold to non-tribal people, which accounts for why some white people currently live on reservations. It also states that the president can kind of move you wherever you need to be. Anyway, reservation can be trying to fit everything all in there. We're going to have to erase something at some point. I mean, there are many reasons why natives would sell to non-tribal people, and a lot of it had to do with money. Remember, the natives didn't get their money, it was in a trust fund. So with the world rapidly changing and not being able to live off the land as they were accustomed to doing, you know, and they were starving, and if they had the land, the allotments of land, they would sell so that they would have money to feed their families, keep their families alive. So yeah, the other part of that is president can. Oh, I just lost it. Yeah, he can remove and, well, how do I say that? We'll leave it at that for now. We're going too far down a rabbit hole. We might not be ready for it. So you get the idea that basically, you know, this was their reservation, our reservation. We had no control over basically what could happen to it, where we would go, where we would be. If the president wanted, he can come in and change it all up. He allotted the land to people who couldn't afford it. No, we're good here. Article 8. The annuities of the aforesaid tribes and bands shall not be taken to pay the debts of individuals. I mean, of all of the ones that we've read so far, that one kind of simple to understand. It's not as laborious as the other ones we've read through. Simply put, the money, no, that's not how you spell money. The money that the tribes and bands got from selling their lands to the U.S. government was not to be used to pay off debts within the tribe. Why was that important, you might be asking? Or maybe I'm just asking. Considering that the money went into a trust account and was allocated at random by an agent at the BIA to the natives via goods and other items, it is really hard to understand why the natives weren't allowed to use their money to pay off their debts. If debts were owed within the tribe, then perhaps the government didn't want one native to have more money than the others. Perhaps this would make him equal to the white people in the area. I didn't find a whole lot of information on that. For as hard as I searched. Okay, so now I'm going to have to start erasing stuff. So let's do that. Okay. All right. Article 9. The said tribes and bands acknowledge their dependence on the government of the United States and promise to be friendly with all citizens thereof, and they pledge themselves to commit no depredations on the property of such citizens. Should any one or more of them violate this pledge, and the fact be satisfactorily proven before the agent, the property taken shall be returned, or in default thereof, if injured or destroyed, compensations may be made by the government out of their annuities. Nor will they make war on any other tribe except in self-defense, but will submit all matters of difference between them and the other Indians to the government of the United States or its agent for decision, and abide thereby. And if any of the said Indians commit depredations on other Indians within the territory, the same rule shall prevail as that prescribed in this article in cases of depredations against citizens. And the said tribe agrees not to shelter or conceal offenders against the laws of the United States, but to deliver them up to the authorities for trial. So, those tribes who signed the treaty and agreed to its terms were to be acknowledged as independent to the government of the United States. So once they acknowledged that, they had to promise to be friendly with all the other citizens. And remember, citizens mean the white settlers. So in simpler terms, the natives were recognized as rulers of their own reservation, but they were not allowed to war with the U.S. or other tribes, and they couldn't shelter wanted criminals. Not allowed to we're the rulers of our own land. How come there's so many rules? Article 10. More on Article 9 before we go to Article 10. Various tribes were known for warring with each other, and there was, even a bit of warring against the settlers coming into the area. By signing the treaty, the natives understood that they couldn't do that anymore. So they couldn't war with, tribes that they had disagreements with, and they couldn't war with people who were settling on their land that the government had bought. This article didn't work both ways, as Native people were often murdered by white people for little to no reason. They were perfectly legal to shoot natives who wandered onto white settlers' lands, so that's awful. Article 10. Okay, the above tribes and bands are desirous to exclude from their reservations the use of ardent spirits, and to prevent their people from drinking the same, and therefore it is provided that any Indian belonging to said tribe who is guilty of bringing liquor into said reservations, or who drinks liquor, may have his or her proportion of the annuities withheld from him or her for such time as the president may determine. No booze, basically. Which is kind of, so it was liquor. I like the word ardent spirits. Sounds very festive. Booze, liquor, whatever, became illegal on tribal lands. But it was the white people who brought the liquor into the reservations, and now they, wanted it to be illegal. So why? It was because of the white settlers that we had alcohol. So one of the reasons why this article exists is tribes, the different tribes, the different bands, they did have a say in what their treaty, what could go into their treaty. And some of the leaders, they agreed that they didn't want alcohol on their reservations. They thought it was evil. It disabled people's minds and made them foolish. And the people who signed the treaties no longer wanted alcohol to affect their membership of the reservations. So, so then, Governor Isaac Stevens, made it illegal, but that's what they wanted. Did that happen? Not really. Natives would still get alcohol. They were still, it was still making its way to the reservations. And a lot of the drinking was, linked to other things, this frustration of, moving to new reservation lands, losing their ties to traditional hunting, fishing, and gathering grounds, having to, make new houses for themselves that were not like the longhouses. So I think it's, a safe assumption to say that depression might have played a role in the fact that, the natives would still find alcohol and they would still drink. But that's generational trauma for you. Article 11. We're coming to the end. Where there's only 15. The said tribes and bands agree to free all slaves now held by them, and not to purchase or acquire others hereafter. Pretty simple, straightforward, no slaves. It's no surprise, well, it depends on who you are. Our ancestors used to have slaves. We used to raid on other tribes. We would take prisoners. We'd make them slaves. They had, I mean, they didn't have, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't alive back then, but I mean, they did the same work as anybody else. You know, they helped keep the tribe alive. They, you know, fished. They would help with fishing. They'd help with gathering, you know, whatever was needed. This was like pre-Civil War times, and the Native people didn't really treat the slaves the way that white people treated theirs. So, yeah. But yeah, that is a part, you know, part of the treaty. They couldn't have slaves. They couldn't go acquire new ones. So, yeah. Article 12. The said tribes and bands agree further. Let me read that again because I'm getting tongue-tied. The said tribes and bands further agree not to trade at Vancouver's Island or elsewhere out of the dominions of the United States, nor shall foreign Indians be permitted to reside in their reservations without consent of the superintendent or agent. So these are like trade restrictions. And also, foreign Indians can't reside on the reservation without the consent of the BIA superintendent. So, foreign Indians basically means like natives from other tribes, other reservations. So that's, yeah, trade restrictions. Vancouver Island was where the British had their outposts. And seeing as how the British and the U.S. were sparring over boundaries, it was forbidden for the Indigenous to trade with British outposts or any other outposts, really, whatever. Because I know that there was, anyways. So they had to basically, you know, like they couldn't trade with the outposts because they were considered like wards of the United States. Like we weren't citizens, obviously, but we were still kind of wards of the United States government. And so I guess it, you know, it was kind of like natives trading with British. That's like trading with the enemy or something. Article 13, to enable the said Indians to remove to and settle upon their aforesaid reservations and to clear, fence, and break up a sufficient quantity of land for cultivation, the United States further agree to pay the sum of $15,000 to be laid out and expended under the direction of the President in such a manner as he shall approve. More money that we don't get to determine how to spend it without the President saying it's okay. This article involved the natives moving to their reservation lands and preparing them for farming. So, preparing lands for farming and government gives aid in farming and what have you. As we mentioned before, a lot of the land wasn't suitable for farming. There were lots of marshes and swamps and wetlands, and it made it like impossible to farm. Like, they're supposed to be provided with the means to do that, like the agricultural school, to break up portions of the land for farming, and that, you know, was an impossible task. Let's move this up a little bit. Okay, Article 14. Now, why did I do that? The lack of sleep. The United States further agreed to establish at the General Agency for the District of Puget Sound within 1 year from the ratification hereof and to support for a period of 20 years an agricultural and industrial school to be free to children of the said tribes and bands in common with those of the other tribes of said district, and to provide the said school with a suitable instructor or instructors, and also to provide a smithy and carpenter's shop and furnish them with necessary tools and employ a blacksmith, carpenter, and farmer for the like of 20 years to instruct the Indians in their respective occupations. And the United States finally agreed to employ a physician to reside at the said central agency who shall furnish medicine and advice to their sick and shall vaccinate them. The expenses of said school, shops, persons employed, and medical attendants to be defrayed by the United States and not deducted from the annuities. So they're supposed to get that school for agriculture and industry, but they're also supposed to get a physician, a carpenter, and a blacksmith, and a farmer to help them, learn the ways of farming. So let's see. Industry. A physician, farmer, blacksmith, whoops, and carpenter. Oh, that right looks weird. Yeah, so they were supposed to get these things. Was it important? Yes. Well, depends on who you ask. These are basically assimilation promises. The white people wanted the native people to be just like them. The colonizers saw indigenous people as different, barbaric, savage, and it was their mission to get them to act as the colonizers did. This meant schools that would educate them on how to farm the land and how to earn money for food and other goods. But to expect a nation of people to go from their, at the time, current cultural existence to that of a white person is, for the lack of a better word, insane. All the indigenous people's food came from the waters or the rivers of the Sound. And hold on a minute. We're good. So all of the indigenous people's food came from the waters or rivers, or it came from the forests, or it came from, just various aspects of the land. We were living off the land. We had taken care of the land forever, and the land had taken care of us. So when they attempted, where was I? So they couldn't do any of that now. So they couldn't, get into their canoes and travel to their fishing areas. They were told to get back on their lands. They were expected to, learn to farm. And aside from the fact that the land was hard to cultivate, it was hard to get anything to grow. Too much water will kill anything you put into the ground. And this is Washington. We got a lot of water around here. Well, not right now. It's freaking hot. So they were always harassed to staying on the reservation. And like we mentioned before, this is why people starved. This is why people turned to alcohol. This is why they sold their allotments for money. And it was just no way of life for the indigenous people who had a completely different, cultural existence. But yeah, instead of the schools for agriculture and industry, we got the boarding schools, Catholic boarding schools, which taught them the Catholic way of life. And that turned into a government boarding school. And we all know, that was another assimilation technique, strip them of their culture, strip them of their traditional clothing, strip them of their language, song and dance. So, yeah. So, last one. Hopefully you guys are hanging in there. I can't tell who's watching, so I could be talking to myself. It's fine. It's not weird. Article 15, this treaty shall be obligatory on the contracting parties as soon as the same shall be ratified by the President and the Senate of the United States. So this is basically the one that says as soon as the President and Senate signs it, it's law. It becomes law when signed. President, Senate. So the lands would go to the U.S. government. The natives would go on the reservations. This, article is like, hey, we all agree. We know that isn't technically. Sealed the fates of hundreds of indigenous people in the Puget Sound. So, yeah. So this is our treaty. It's not always pretty. There are parts of it that are, it's hard to digest. It's tough pill to swallow, if you will. But it did, bind us to the government, which is a good and bad thing. A bad and good thing. Sometimes more bad than good, it seemed. But because we made these, like the Article 5 for the fishing and hunting and gathering in usual and accustomed areas, I mean, that would show up later with the Bolt decision. And that was kind of a big deal. I mean, it wasn't even kind of a big deal. It was a huge deal. Let's be real. It was a big deal. But a lot of it was, just the colonizers coming into the area and saying, you know what? We want your land. This is what we're willing to give you. And, we'll leave, we'll set aside a little bit of land for you. You can, but you have to, in order to, get this, you've got to be like colonizers. I mean, the hell kind of head games are you playing, government? But yes, that is our treaty in a, I don't want to say nutshell, but yeah. So I hope whoever's watching, that you've learned something, or that you've enjoyed listening to me talk. I enjoy teaching people about this kind of stuff. I think it's really important. And I hope to see you all tomorrow. Tomorrow I am doing another one, same time, same place. It's not like I'm taking my show on the road or nothing. Tomorrow we will be going over the Lushootseed alphabet. So we're gonna just practice the different sounds, and then we'll do a few words. Yeah, it's gonna be swell.